Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host, Michael, and this episode is Q&A number 103. Before we get into today's questions, big thanks to our sponsors. First, we have Precision Hydration that you can find on precisionhydration.com. They make electrolyte products that you can match to how you sweat, and specifically to how much sodium you lose in your sweat, because that can vary by a large amount. Somebody on the lower end of the spectrum might lose less than 500 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat, whereas somebody on the higher end can lose more than 2,000 milligrams per liter of sweat. And when you combine that with the fact that we might have different sweat rates, so anywhere from 750 mils per hour or 500 mils per hour, depending on weather conditions, to somebody else having more than 2 liters per hour, or even up to 3 liters per hour, then you can see that it quickly starts to matter how much electrolytes you replenish, because it's not going to be the same for everybody. You can figure out your benchmark by going to precisionhydration.com and taking their free online sweat test, which takes just a few minutes. And then you can get 15% off your electrolyte products with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15. And thank you to Roka that you can find on roka.com. Roka are the world-leading manufacturers of wetsuits, tri-suits, swim skins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses, and they are trusted by some of the greatest of the great triathletes in the world, including athletes like Javier Gomez, Mario Mola, Lucy Charles Barclay, Katie Zafiris, and so on and so forth. There's no shortage of great athletes, world championship medals, Olympic medals, etc. in the Roka roster. Whatever products you're interested in, you can get a very nice 20% discount with the promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS. Now on to today's questions. The first one is from Mickey in the United Arab Emirates, who writes, "Hi Michael, a bit late proposing this question so long after lockdown, but like many others, I started cycling indoors this year for the first time ever and have no clarity on how to modify power targets for indoor training. The first thing I noticed was how much more difficult higher RPE, or rating of perceived exertion, it was compared to cycling outdoors, due to the constant force production required and with no freewheeling, micro breaks and so on. With time, this effect has reduced over the 6 months I have been training at home indoors, and I can feel that the benefits have translated to outdoor cycling. However, in order to train accurately, I have researched the difference between indoor and outdoor cycling power to ensure I am hitting the correct intensities for each session. Some things I've found suggest a difference of 10 to 15% in watts between indoor and outdoor power. And some claim that the RPE difference will be completely eliminated with enough time and adaptation. I know that you normally apply a 10% target range to your power targets in your training plans, and as such, I normally target the lower range limit on the trainer, which should ensure I am in the correct zone. However, it would be useful to be able to apply some further finesse to increase the accuracy of the quantity of intensity minutes I am collecting, which I track carefully." All right, thanks so much, Mickey, for the question. And basically, to sum up, we were looking to establish if there is a specific difference in power between indoor and outdoor cycling. The short and sweet answer is that I tend to suggest that 10% is a common difference. So that means that outdoors you are likely to be able to produce 10% more power than indoors for the same perceived effort, and even your top peak powers for whatever duration. Let's say you do a 20-minute test, it might be 10% higher outdoors than indoors. But this is for somebody who finds the indoor trainer pretty hard to train on compared to outdoors. So somebody like you, at least at the start of your starting to train indoors. On the other hand, somebody who's very experienced with indoor training can expect something more in the range of a 0 to 5% difference. So a 0 to 5% decrease in power indoors compared to outdoors. So I would say that what you're doing of staying at the lower end of the target range in my training plans is that puts you right in the range, as you say. It's a good starting point for sure. And just one thing to clarify around that target range. So you said in your question, actually, I modified the question a little bit because you said plus minus 10%, but it's actually plus minus 5% more commonly. So let's say you're doing some sort of high intensity intervals where the middle part of the range is 115%, then the range would be 110 to 120% usually. But this range, one other thing that I should clarify is that this range is not always 10% wide. It really depends on the workout that you're doing. But 10% is usually it's pretty close to 10%. Sometimes it might be slightly bigger. Sometimes it might be slightly smaller. Usually not much smaller than that though. So anyway, that's just a little bit of a clarification. But it could be that you have a workout where it's slightly smaller or bigger than that 10% range. And what you're doing then is that you're aiming for, if you take an example here, let's say you're doing a workout where the target range is 80 to 90% of FTP. Then what you're doing, Mickey, is that you're shooting for that lower end, so 80% of FTP as your target on the indoor trainer. The assumption we're doing here is, well, one thing that is clear is that you're using as a starting point your FTP that is probably tested outdoors, from what I can understand at least. And then the assumption is that outdoors, if doing the same workout, you would be able to hit the upper end of that workout range. Because then, let's say, if it's possible for you to hit 90% in that workout, then 80% as a target when you're training indoors should be a pretty safe bet, because that puts you in that minus 10% range indoors compared to outdoors. So that's it. It can work, but it's one thing that I should say here is that if hypothetically you would still struggle indoors despite staying at that low end of the range, it wouldn't be entirely surprising. Because if we continue this example, and let's say that your FTP outdoors that you've tested is 250 watts, then the 80 to 90% target of 250 watts would mean that you should do those intervals between 200 to 225 watts. And 85% right in the middle of that range would be 213 watts, rounding up. But if on the day 85% or 213 watts would be your ideal target doing this workout outdoors, and anything above that would be too much, maybe because you're in the middle of a demanding training block, or maybe you haven't slept or eaten as well as you usually do, it's quite possible that the upper end of the range on a given day might not be feasible, but the midpoint of the range is, or even outdoors, maybe the low end of the range is some days what is the most realistic for you. So anyway, if on this given day we assume that outdoors you would be able to hit 213 watts, so the mid end of the range, but the upper end would be a bit too much because of the training load or something. Then if we apply the 10% estimate and we assume that you are actually losing 10% power when training indoors compared to outdoors, then that ideal 213 watt target or 85% target corresponds to 192 watts indoors. And again, keep in mind that the range that you had there for the workout was 200 to 225. So, but in reality, with these calculations and some assumptions, it might turn out that that's almost 10 watts too high, despite you trying to go at the lower end. So just keep in mind that if the target range is 10 percentage units wide, then targeting the low end of that range assumes that outdoors on that day you would be able to hit the very top end of the range. And this is sometimes, maybe often the case, but it's not always the case. So you also need to give yourself the flexibility of going below the target range, maybe by simply calculating an indoor FTP estimate for yourself. And that could be 90% of your outdoor FTP, or it could be 92%. And these 10 and 8% decrements, of course, assume that you still struggle a bit with riding indoors compared to outdoors, which again is normal. It will take time to get to closer to that 5% or 0% range. But anyway, that might be the way to go rather than simply targeting the range that is based on your outdoor FTP. And if we take this a little further and we dig a little bit into what we know from research, then 10% is a rule that comes primarily from anecdotal evidence, I should say. But there was an interesting paper that I'll link to in the show notes called Gross Efficiency and Cycling Economy are higher in the field as compared with on an Axiom stationary ergometer. And in their conclusions, they write that with the same VO2 consumption used in the laboratory, the cyclists could generate a higher power output close to 10% in the field compared with the Axiom stationary ergometer conditions. They did also say that there is conflicting evidence around this from previous studies, and at high intensities above critical power, or FTP for our intents and purposes, power output may not be significantly different between indoor and outdoor conditions, because in their study they tested economy and efficiency, which is a sub-maximal test, so they tested this below critical power. Anyway, this is one study that found that 10% difference to potentially be something that could actually be backed up by evidence. But another example of the conflicting evidence we're talking about is a study called Reliability of Mean Power Recorded During Indoor and Outdoor Self-Paced 40-kilometer Cycling Time Trials. This study found no differences between indoor and outdoor power on average. So the subjects, there were 8 subjects in this study. They did 3 40-kilometer time trials indoors and 3 of them outdoors. So this was great because they got reliable results by averaging across several trials for each subject in each condition. So there is a fair amount of individual variance in the data, which you can see if you go to through the link in the episode description that I'll give to the paper. Table 3 will show you the power for each subject for each time trial. So all the data is there. And for example, we see from that table that there are 4 subjects that are kind of their indoor power is 91 to 94% of their outdoor power on average. But you also have one subject who averaged the exact same power indoors as outdoors, and one subject that actually managed 5% higher power indoors compared to outdoors. So again, the individual variance is big, and I think that's my conclusion here. It's possible to reach the same or pretty much the same performance level indoors as outdoors, but it requires you getting used to it over a period of time. And I do think that there is a trend as well, based on some other studies I saw, that for more experienced or more well-trained athletes, the difference seems to be smaller. For example, I saw one study that was in very, very kind of recreational athletes, or kind of almost like a sedentary population, not really athletes per se. And in that study, the difference was massive, but probably training level plays a role here in how much difference you will experience. But another thing that plays a role is equipment. So the first thing that you need to really, really get on top of when it comes to indoor training is heat and ventilation, or I should say lack of heat, because ideally you want your room to be as cool as possible. So I think that you probably have air conditioning there in the United Arab Emirates, which is great, of course, but you still need a couple of really good fans is almost like mandatory for anybody training indoors. You have 2 fans that are really good, because otherwise you will overheat so much and your performance will be reduced indoors because of the lack of cooling and heat thermoregulation. So heat and ventilation, super important. But there might also be smaller differences based on the type of trainer that you use. So for example, if you're using a wheel-on trainer versus a direct drive trainer, so for listeners that don't know the terminology here, direct drive trainers, you don't keep the rear wheel on, but you actually just you put your bike on the cassette that is attached to the trainer flywheel, essentially. So and that's what most high-end smart trainers use, this sort of system. But the wheel on is where you keep both your wheels on your bike, and then you press a resistance roll against your rear tire, and that's what creates the resistance there. And the difference here is that a direct drive trainer will have a slightly more realistic inertia profile or resistance profile across the pedal stroke, which might lead it to perceptually feel a bit easier. It feels more like riding outdoors. So especially as you get started with indoor training, this can be an advantage to actually have a direct drive trainer. The disadvantage is that these are the more expensive trainers typically. And but even within the segment of direct drive trainers, you might have small differences. Like if you have a trainer that uses a very heavy flywheel, then this will be pretty good, pretty realistic at simulating outdoor riding. And this might again help reducing RPE a bit of your workout. But these trainers tend to be the most expensive ones though, and the ones with slightly less heavy flywheels might more on the moderate pricing side of things. They still have a good sort of road feel and decent inertia and resistance profile, but they have less of they keep less of the inertia than the ones with a really heavy flywheel. So there are some differences there in terms of which trainer you choose as well. But finally, to get back to your question, if you want the most accurate power targets for indoor training, I would say do a new FTP test or some sort of test equivalently indoors and set your targets based specifically on that indoor environment. And if you don't want to do that, then just the estimates that you should do is you should expect that you may lose as much as 10% power indoors versus outdoors. But there is no one formula you can apply to get any more accuracy or finesse into how to change your power targets, other than just simply estimating that if your FTP outdoors is, for example, 250 watts, then if you assume that it's 5 to 10% lower indoors, then your FTP indoors is probably between 225 to 238 watts in this example. And you can then use these numbers, and probably the lower number makes more sense to make sure you can complete your workouts, to adjust your workout power targets based on your estimated indoor FTP. And then, of course, use RPE within the workout and use heart rate within the workout itself as well. So that's it. Hope this helps, and thanks again for your question, Mickey. The next question is from Hussein, who writes, "Hi Michael, I came across your article or your episode about about supplements for triathletes. I am 39 years old and I train 2 or 3 times per week, mostly running. I mostly do aerobic exercises, but I would also like to gain some muscle mass. I do not take any supplements, but I think I need to do so. I decided to do a search on the internet, but realized there are too many different opinions about whether to take supplements or not, and if to be taken, which supplements are best for me. I try to eat healthy food and avoid junk food as much as possible. I am diagnosed with anemia, which means iron deficiency, but it's at a moderate level. I would be happy if you could be of any help to me." All right, thank you, Hussein, for the question. So, as you found out, there is an episode that digs deep into the details, but I'm more than happy to give a summary and some main takeaways for you and others in a similar situation. But I will link to the main episode, which is episode 193, called Evidence-Based Supplements for Triathletes and Endurance Athletes. And in that episode, I refer to and link to the IOC, the International Olympic Committee's consensus statement from 2018, which was produced by a number of the best researchers in the field in sports nutrition. And that consensus statement basically has the state-of-the-art science around supplements, which ones do have evidence for them and which ones do not. And I'll link to that as well. So based on that article, we can categorize supplements in 4 different groups for athletes, I should say. There are supplements used to prevent or treat nutrient deficiencies. There are supplements used to provide a practical form of energy and nutrients. There are supplements that directly improve sports performance, and supplements that indirectly improve sports performance. So supplements, so if you start with actually supplements used to provide a practical form of energy and nutrients, they include things like sports drinks and gels and protein powders probably, And these are, of course, very useful for athletes that do longer workouts or more intense workouts to take on sports drinks and gels to make sure that you can maintain your performance level. For you, when you're training 3 times per week, maybe not very relevant because you probably don't train super long. So I don't think that you really need any sports drinks or gels for any of those sessions. And I would say that this is a very useful group of supplements for people that train more, that have some long sessions and some really intense sessions. But for people that train at the level that you're training, probably not so much. A good ballpark number is that if the workout is 90 minutes or longer, then you would benefit from taking on energy in this form. But if it's shorter, then you don't need to do that. So I'll leave it at that. Well, protein, I should say, again, if you're training 3 times per week, you don't need to supplement with protein. And even for many endurance athletes, I don't think that we need to supplement. Like, it's pretty easy to get protein from food. So for the most part, we don't need to supplement that much with protein. And I think that, as we'll talk about perhaps in next week's or in 2 weeks' time on an interview I do with Dr. Bob Murray, it's probably a lot more difficult to actually get carbohydrates than to get protein. So I think that protein is useful to have as a convenient supplement for endurance athletes to train a lot, but it's not something that should be relied upon as a main source of protein. That should be whole food sources of protein. I started with that number 2. I'm approaching this list in a little bit of a different order, but let me actually go to number 3 next, which is supplements that directly improve sports performance. So in other words, the idea here is that you take a supplement sometime before a workout or a race, sometimes even as part of a multi-day loading protocol, and you get a benefit in form of improved endurance or strength capacity and performance. In this category of supplements, we have 3 supplements that have positive evidence, and these are caffeine and nitrate for endurance performance and creatine for strength performance. In your particular case, it sounds like you're not racing, you're more training to stay fit and healthy. So unless I'm mistaken, that if that is the case, then none of these supplements are relevant for you at all. But I'll give a brief overview for other listeners of the benefits of these supplements because they can be good for racing, assuming that you have practice with them in training beforehand. So caffeine can on average give you a 2 to 3% improvement in endurance performance. And the typical protocol would be to take 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram body weight an hour or so before the race or the performance. For much more information, go and listen to episode 234, which is Caffeine and Endurance Performance with Ajmal Ali, PhD. Nitrate can also give a small performance boost on the order of 1 to 3%. Recent evidence seems to suggest that it may be most beneficial if you buffer nitrate. So you do a multi-day loading protocol, taking it twice per day for a week leading up to a race. For more information on nitrate, listen to episode 187, Nitrate Loading, Marathons and Endurance Sports Science with Professor Andy Jones. And it is important to point out at this point that the effects of supplements are probably not additive. So let's say that you would get a boost from caffeine by 2.5% and a 1.5% boost by nitrate. That does not mean that you would get a 4% improvement by using both caffeine and nitrate. Personally, I still do use both caffeine and nitrate before important races, but I don't expect a 4% improvement by any means. I just pray for a combined improvement of maybe in that 2 to 3% range, realistically speaking. Creatine is absolutely beneficial for strength and power athletes. So if you are interested in improving muscle strength or size, then it can be very useful, but it requires that you actually strength train. So I don't know, you don't have that in your question at the moment. If that is something that you're going to get more serious about, then check out creatine. But for endurance athletes, it's not really relevant at all, not even for endurance athletes to do strength training, because that's not really the kind of adaptations that we're after. So that's basically it. For endurance athletes, you have caffeine and nitrate that directly improve race performance, and they have good evidence, so are worth using if you're looking for maximum performance in races. But let's continue to the next category: supplements used to prevent or treat nutrient deficiencies. And the 3 supplements that may be important here, and I say maybe, it doesn't mean that you should take all of them or should take any one of them, but they are vitamin D, iron, and calcium. So vitamin D is a really important one, the most important one on average, for sure. A deficiency in vitamin D can lead to general fatigue and greater susceptibility to illness. And in today's society, with most of us having indoor desk jobs and not spending that much time out in the sun, it is a supplement that really most people in Western countries could benefit from taking, as vitamin D is a vitamin that we get from direct skin exposure to sunlight for extended durations. So naturally, where you live has a big impact on how likely you are to be deficient and just how deficient you are. With, for example, people in Scandinavia, I think pretty much everyone should take it there. But we do know that even in climates that are known to be sunny and sun exposed, like in the Mediterranean area, it is still very easy and very common to be deficient in vitamin D. So I would say this is the one single supplement that most people listening probably should be taking. Of course, testing to confirm whether you have a deficiency is the best approach, but it's one that a lot of athletes will benefit from taking. And more about vitamin D you can actually listen to in the episode that we had 1 week or 2 weeks ago with doctors Joel McKay and Kush Joshi. We talked quite a lot about that and how vitamin D can even be important for preventing stress fractures. Now, iron has the crucial function of helping transport oxygen to the working muscles as part of the hemoglobin molecule. So an iron deficiency can lead to decreased oxygen supply to working muscles and therefore to greatly reduced performance. This iron supplementation is important if and only if you are actually deficient, which in your case you have a moderate anemia. But it is important for endurance athletes to not just take iron supplements because it can be toxic if you have too much of it, but actually get tested for serum iron and for ferritin. And if you are low, talk to a medical professional about how to supplement. This is not a DIY supplement. This is something that you should have medical help for. So that's basically it for you, Hussein. It means talk to your doctor, get information around how you should supplement for your anemia, and also get tested fairly regularly. Again, consult with your doctor for this to see how often it makes sense for you to test. Oh, and by the way, something I should add that I didn't mention is that some symptoms of anemia, other than decreased endurance performance, is feeling very fatigued, tired, and flat. That those would be basically some of the main things that would lead you to go and get a test to see if you're deficient. But it could also be a vitamin D deficiency or another deficiency. So it's not just iron that you'd be testing. But again, more on that in the episode 249 with Drs. McKay and Joshi. Now, lastly, calcium. Calcium is an important component for bone health and for muscle and nerve cell function. It's one of those things worth checking in a blood panel on a regular basis. But generally speaking, if you consume a normal amount of dairy products, then you're unlikely to be deficient. But for people that limit their dairy intake, then that can be something that you should be checking regularly. And also, lack of calcium or calcium deficiency has been linked to general energy restriction. So if you're on a diet, if you're on a caloric deficit, you're trying to lose weight, then it's probably worth tracking your calcium to see how you're doing on that front. But if you have a verified calcium deficiency, then yes, supplementing makes sense. If not, then it doesn't really. The final group of supplements, as per the IOC consensus statement, are the supplements that improve performance indirectly. So this is a varied group of supplements that claim to enhance performance indirectly by supporting athletes' health, body composition, and ability to train hard and recover quickly, ability to adapt better and tolerate pain better, and so on and so forth. So there is, of course, a vast group of supplement candidates in this category, and there are only very few that have strong evidence going for them. So vitamin D is included in this group as well because it's associated with reducing the risk of upper respiratory tract infections and also with reducing the risk of stress fractures, as mentioned. So vitamin D definitely on the list for things worth taking. Then we have probiotics is the other one, and they have also been associated with a reduced risk of upper respiratory tract infections as well as gastrointestinal infections. The evidence for efficacy of probiotics is moderate, which is okay. So it's fully understandable that some people, especially those working a lot around other people under normal circumstances, not work at home circumstances, might want to take probiotics as an extra insurance measure from getting sick, getting an infection. But for me, for example, working at home, even in any circumstances, and not being that much around people, I personally do not consider the evidence of probiotics compelling enough for me to take them. So in summary, what supplements should you be taking? Vitamin D for you, I think, because I think for almost anybody, vitamin D is important. And if you have an indoor job, then you're probably not getting enough sun exposure that you're getting all the vitamin D that you need. It can be tested. That would be better, of course, than assuming that you need it. But vitamin D is a good one to take. And iron, based on your doctor's prescription with your diagnosed anemia, is something that you should take as well. But do not supplement iron without that consultation with your doctor. And I would say that once or twice per year, get a blood panel and check your iron levels, of course, but also check vitamin D and calcium. And based on that, you may need to change your dose of vitamin D and iron. And if you identify a calcium deficiency, then that's worth supplementing as well. There are some things that I have left out on this list because they are medications rather than supplements. So such as thyroid medication, for example. So we talked about that again in episode 249. But the reason for this is that while supplements shouldn't be taken lightly, for example, iron is a perfect example of that, it's still something completely different from medication because medication is given in response to a specific medical condition. Supplements may or may not be, but most often they are not a medical condition, although anemia is a medical condition. But a deficiency is not the same as a medical condition. But they can lead to medical conditions, and that is the difference. So that's the reason for not including medications on this list, but actually only things that are supplements. So I'll finish off by giving you my list of supplements that I take. So first, in the category of to provide energy and nutrients. So during workouts, I use gels mostly, sometimes sports drinks. I use electrolytes as well, precision hydration, of course. And I do use some whey protein, but try not to rely too heavily on it, and try to make sure that I get plenty of protein from whole foods as well, including both plant-based food and some fish and some meat. And for direct performance improvement in races, I, as I said, use both caffeine and nitrate. For the really important races, nitrate is something that I preload with for 5 or 6 days before the race. 400 milligrams twice per day, I believe, is the dose. And caffeine, I try to take 3 to 4 milligrams per kilogram body weight an hour before the race. And in terms of other supplements, only vitamin D. So that's it. And in terms of a diet, I eat everything, don't restrict macronutrients or food groups. And I do get a blood panel test every now and then to make sure that I don't have any deficiencies. And it seems that I don't. I'm very stable in those other levels. So seems that this is working for me. But of course, everybody needs to find what's working for them, because different climates, different diets and so on will impact what you need to take and what you don't need to take. All right. Thank you for your question, Hussein. I hope this helps. And that's it for today. Keep sending in questions to michael@scientifictriathlon.com, and that's Michael with a K. You can find this Q&A and all previous Q&As on scientifictriathlon.com. Please subscribe to the podcast in your podcast app so you don't miss future episodes, and tune in on Monday to hear an interview with cycling coach James Sprague on all things cycling training, highly relevant for both triathletes and cycling. If you're interested in training plans or coaching to take your triathlon performance to the next level, go and check out scientifictriathlon.com and the information we have there. It could very well be the best investment you can make in your own improved performance. Thank you to our sponsors, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Go and take their free online sweat test to get a personalized hydration strategy and get 15% off your electrolytes with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15. And thank you to Roka, that you can find on roka.com. Go and check out their wetsuits, dry suits, swimskins, goggles, and high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses, and get 20% off your order with the promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.